Good evening to all our listeners and viewers today. I'm sorry we've had to start so late. There were reasons beyond anyone's control here, which I think Dr. Tharoor might tell us a little bit more about maybe when the conversation begins properly. My job here is really to say that we are here to discuss a wonderful, a brilliant, and very timely book that we at Westland are privileged to have published. This is Pavan Varma's The Great Hindu Civilization. We will have an opportunity to hold this up and launch it formally a little later. But I just want to say that as the publishers of this book, we think that this is one of the most important books that we have published, and that it wades into a battleground almost from our times that somebody needed to wade in the way Pavan has. And I'm sure this wasn't easy. I'm assuming that there were a lot of considerations and choices to be made while this book was being thought about and written. And I'm hoping that in the conversation that follows, we will get to hear about some of these. Why would Pavan Varma choose to write about the great Hindu civilization at this point in time? Why did the book take the shape it did? And what are the many windmills that he tilts at, not vainly, I think most impressively and most meaningfully? And I do hope that a lot of these questions and answers will come up in the course of the conversation today. I'm delighted that Dr. Shashi Tharoor is here to do this conversation, because who better to talk about the compulsions of politics and religion and Hinduism? His own work has addressed this. His work in Parliament addresses this. And, honestly, if there is something to be said for the great Hindu civilization, it is at this time also that it has produced gentlemen like these two, who have been writing and reflecting all their lives and are now bringing to us more and more intense discussions around a subject that we really, really need to think a lot more about. So I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Shashi Tharoor to grill Pavan Varma on the hows and
Why
whys and
grill?
wherefores of the great Hindu civilization. Why grill? Because we need to have some fun as well, listening to a firecracker conversation. And I'm really hoping Dr. Tharoor will drive that. Over to you, Dr. Tharoor.
Thank you, Karthik. Well, first of all, the apology that's due to all the listeners, since we are more than an hour late for this book launch, and it's because I was stuck in Parliament. The Lok Sabha was voting on the constitutional amendment, the 127th constitutional amendment, as it will be, which corrects an anomaly regarding OBC reservations and states' rights. Unfortunately, because of the COVID situation in our country, there are new protocols that prohibit MPs from doing their usual seating arrangements. The greater separation has at least notionally been introduced, as a result of which the usual electronic voting was not possible. And each time a vote was called, it had to be recorded on slips of paper. And a process that normally would have taken 15 minutes took 2 hours plus to finish. And during the time, once a vote has begun, the doors are locked and you cannot step out. I actually, having cast my first vote and recorded my support for this venture, I tried to get out of the Parliament and was told there is no way that they'll be allowed to open the doors. So I went back and voted 5 more times. Everything is done. We are now, I'm in a moving car for the next few minutes. And I know I'm in darkness right now, but I will shortly be visible to react to Pavan's reactions to what I'm going to say. I must say, Pavan, I thoroughly enjoyed the book, The Great Hindu Civilization. If Kartika was hoping for a grilling, she's gone to the wrong person, because Pavan and I agree entirely. And I say this with some diffidence, because always there's something one might disagree with normally, even in a good friend's writing. But on the subject of Hinduism in contemporary Indian politics, we are literally on the same page. Pavan's first section in this book is essentially an echo with admirable concision of what I have written in Why I'm a Hindu, tracing the same ground, outlining the same issues and arguments for why Hinduism is essentially a religion that encourages doubt, uncertainty, debate, rational reasoning, and acceptance of difference, all of which were taught to us subsequently by great sages over the centuries, culminating in Swami Vivekananda's explanation of Hinduism that I've, as a teenager, been converted by into being a sort of Advaitist, something that I probably hadn't realized I was until I read Swami Vivekananda. And I must say that proceeding from there, Pavan makes a series of arguments that to some may be seen as controversial, but which I'm very happy to completely endorse in more detail than I myself have been able to do. In other words, I did incur some wrath by saying that I believe that Kalidas should be taught alongside Shakespeare, even in English medium schools, and that the Mahabharata and Ramayana are part of our cultural patrimony, and every Indian of every religion should have an opportunity to learn this in the school system, all of which Pavan also says, but Pavan goes beyond that. And I would encourage readers to look very fully at his overall disquisition on how Indian culture is essentially one that sadly many have chosen not to respect, not to honor, partly because of the colonization of our minds that took place with the 200 years of British colonialism. Now, Pavan ends with, and I think this is my one quibble, a section I think is too short at the very end, in which he talks about, here I am now in a better lit room, and where Pavan talks about, apologies. Okay, so where Pavan talks in the last section about the Hinduism and reform it.
1 second.
To reform Hinduism and reclaim it, I think he does some very, very sharp and pertinent writing, which I wish was longer, because I think in many ways that is the challenge awaiting us in the contemporary world. Pretty much everything else that Pavan has written is extremely well researched, soundly understood and argued, and he does so, of course, with his characteristic fluent, lucid, and engaging style. So it's with great pleasure that I'm introducing this book to the readers, and very happy to engage in a conversation with Pavan, except that I'm afraid it's going to be a bit of a love fest, because I honestly don't have any criticisms as such to express, which is always necessary for the firecracker conversation Kartika asked for, but the firecrackers will be silent. Pavan, let me come back then to the one sort of, well, I have two mild criticisms. The first one is that you completely neglect my work, which is not even mentioned in your book. And I find things that I have said reappearing in the words of Amish Tripathi and all sorts of other good people who are friends of mine too. But, we are friends, and I would have hoped that you would have delved a little bit into my work and you would have found a lot of resonance with your own. So that's the first, shall we say, immodest complaint. And the second one, as I said, is at the end. I think you've really laid out a very important case that Hinduism should be reformed, that even some of the advocates of Hindutva like Savarkar had advocated significant reforms in Hinduism. And maybe that's a place we can start. I mean, I think that to start at the ending is obviously wrong, but in this book, what's gone before is always worth talking about, but people really need to read the book to get into the details of it. What it seems to me we can talk about that's not in the book is how precisely can we set about the reform you talk about. Some of the eclectic nature of our faith is precisely what makes reform difficult. It's not like there is an established church you can pick up and reform, or a pope whose authority you can challenge. There is such a vast array of authorities, so many voices, so many seers, so many texts. Where do you go about the process of reforming this faith in a way that brings it into the 21st century without in any way shedding the strong civilizational underpinnings and pillars that you have rightly and rather brilliantly outlined in this book?
Well, thank you, Shashi. First of all, I'm very grateful to you that in spite of a long and I'm sure trying day in Parliament, no doubt rewarding too, You have taken the trouble to be part of this discussion, which is extremely important for me, considering we go back several decades and you are someone I've always held in very high regard. Partly, this discussion must have been a moving experience for you since you were in a car. But now that you reached the safe shores of your office, we can see you better, and it's a great pleasure to be talking to you. Let me take what you said and say with complete honesty that it's an omission on my part not to have quoted you and more extensively because I frankly took so much of the congruence between our thinking for granted. And I have been an admirer of your writing, The Hindu Way, and other books. Uh, and I have reviewed them and I have been in discussion with you. So one part of me said Shashi Tharoor is on the same page anyway, so I don't need to quote him. So it was in no way meant to be even remotely sort of glossing over your own voluminous and remarkable contributions in this area of work.
Don't worry about that point. Let's move on. That's sweet of you.
Secondly, and this is important, you see, I believe very strongly about the ability of Hinduism to reinvent itself. One of the reasons why it's a civilization and a religion which has displayed antiquity, continuity, sustained peaks of refinement, assimilation, and diversity is that it has been able to reinvent itself from the beginnings of time to the present era. So it has never become a museum relic, an antiquity, or a fossilized memory. It's a living tradition. And it is not that it has not faced its vicissitudes. There have been challenges. And yet Hinduism has reinvented itself or adapted to the imperative of change. It may have been slow, it may have been difficult, it may have been uh, complex, it may have been nuanced, but it has adapted and moved on, which is the reason why it is Sanatan, which is why it has survived. And we see this happening several times, uh, especially after the Islamic conquest, as I discuss in some detail in the book. There was a great deal of damage to Hindu artifacts and temples. Uh, I don't think Hindu civilization had seen this kind of proselytizing deal and the degree of violence that accompanied it. And I am not for a moment diminishing the syncretic culture that finally evolved from that interaction and the Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb that we greatly value. But I don't believe we pay sufficient tribute to this dividend if we ignore or gloss over the facts of history by recording the degree of violence and destruction that also followed in the wake of the Turkic invasion. But at that time, faced with such an unrelenting set of rulers lasting over 6 centuries, Hinduism reinvented itself through the Bhakti movement. And in a top down religion largely, no doubt with great refinements that it nurtured, a top down religion became a bottom up religion through the great Bhakti movement and the remarkable efflorescence it led to, not only in terms of its literary output, but in terms of its ideology itself, which changed the character of Hinduism and gave it a mass appeal and led to its democratization and its percolation to the masses through forms which were both innovative and which could adapt to the circumstances of those times. Similarly, with the coming of the British and the aim of colonization, Shashi, as you know very well, is not merely the physical subjugation of people, but the colonization of the mind. And the British was spectacularly successful in this project. But even at that time, there were attempts at Hindu civilizations and Hinduism's revival through many forms. These were not complete movements. These were inadequate in many parts. They were emulatory in many parts. They needed a greater self-introspection in many cases. But nevertheless, the Brahmo Samaj and the Arya Samaj were movements that sought to once again reassert the fundamental and pivotal nature of Hinduism. Similarly, today, we are at a certain crossroads. On the one hand, we have the great civilizational ethos of our, with very tangible achievements, which I spell out in my book. These are remarkable, whether it's in the field of audacity of thought, of philosophy, spirituality, metaphysics, social sciences, science itself, political science, the fields of art and culture, creativity, grammar, you name it. And these are remarkable achievements, which in any case are a corpus on their own and will outlive their own period of time and need to be imbibed and learnt about even today. But over and above that, there is also uh, uh, a challenge to the kind of culture that Shashi you talk about, where the foundational principles were ekam satya vipraha bahuda vadanti. The truth is one, the wise people call it by different names. Or the remarkable courage which must have propelled a sage thousands of years ago to say, Ano bhadraha kritavo yantu vishvatah. Let good thoughts flow to me from all directions. Or the sheer insight by which a civilization and a religion was defined by the simple saying Udara Charitanam Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. The world is a family. As against this, we see the development today of a rather extreme ultra right Hindu movement. If not a movement, I don't know whether I can call it fringe anyway. But I fear that in some respects, the leadership of Hinduism and Hindu civilization has moved to more lumpen hands, which are marked,
You use the word in the book.
yeah,
You
which
use that
whose,
word.
and of these elements, their evangelical zeal to protect Hinduism is in inverse proportion to their knowledge both of the religion and the civilization. Similarly, these people, because of that lack of knowledge, perhaps are averse to the great tradition of Shastrarth in Hinduism of discussion and dialogue. They are orthodox, conservative, some mostly upper caste. They have a derogatory view of women. They are prone to violence and are definitely based on a level of exclusion which goes against the very spirit of Hinduism as outlined in our foundational texts, including the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras. So, in order to meet this challenge today, whereby Hinduism retains not only its sanity and its great civilizational ethos, but also faces this new challenge which is seeking in many ways to distort the Hinduism we know, not to make Hinduism a passive religion. I take on board, Shashi, as you may have seen in the book, many of the valid and legitimate discontents of Hindu Samaj, of Hindu society. And I outline the reasons for them. And I give the reasons why they are valid. I accept them. But
So do
surely,
I. In fact, there's one more that you have not gone into, which is the whole controversy about the fact that only Hindu temples, but not any other religious places of worship, are administered by the government and not by believers. Whereas
indeed,
in other faiths, yeah,
I
that's one omission.
a very important
But
and emotive issue, and I could have taken that on board, but I list several others.
several others
Several
very
others.
wisely, very good.
And therefore we have to take those discontents on board and give them the kind of hearing which so far a certain circle of people, including in the leadership, have considered to be pandering to the Hindu lobby, as it were, whereas actually these are legitimate discontents, and the backlash among the Hindus as because of them is palpable, and in many cases justified. But that apart, I'm not talking of a passive Hinduism. I'm talking of an innovative Hinduism, like in the past, which faces this challenge by once again drawing on the great wellsprings of ideological sustenance which inform this great religion and civilization, and on moving towards reform within Hinduism. One of the reasons why Hinduism, as in the Bhakti movement, Shashi, when it was faced with a challenge, there was a huge movement of reform within Hinduism. The hegemony of the Brahmanical order was challenged. Caste was relegated to the background in many cases. We had a remarkable array of women saints, including Mirabai, Andal, and so on and so forth, who came by and asserted the right of women to be equal participants in both philosophy and religion, and so on and so forth. So Hinduism has the ability to reform itself. But on the two factors where it must today assert itself are the iniquities within Hinduism as a result of the incorrigible hierarchy of the caste system and the discrimination and oppression and injustice that is its consequence. I believe a religion where every 15 minutes a crime, or a civilization where every 15 minutes a crime is committed against a Dalit, and every 8 minutes or so, a Dalit, 6 to 8 Dalit women are raped every day, as per the NCRB. There is something wrong with this kind of militancy against members of your own creed. Leave alone the larger notions of equality and fraternity, and also on the notion of gender parity. I think Hinduism, which had in the past, and I want to make this point. Initially, it appears that women were accorded indeed a status of respect within Hinduism. We have the famous case of Gargi in a large public assembly called by King Janak of Videha, arguing from a level of equality with the foremost sage of that period, Yagnavalkya, and arguing her point with confidence and assertion. So we have the Arthashastra speaks of women in powerful places consciously chosen for those assignments. We have Draupadi who asserts confidently to Yudhishthir whether he had first lost himself before he had the right to sell her, to put her on stake.
And
So
my own
therefore,
favorite story, which you've also told marvelously in great detail here, is the story of the debates between Adi Shankara, Shankaracharya to be, and Mandana Mishra, where
and
when Mandana Mishra asks him to name a judge, he picks Mandana Mishra's wife, Bharati, to be the judge, which
indeed,
I think is an extraordinary thing. And of course, she had the learning and the wisdom not only to play the role of the judge,
and she's
but
accepted both.
and by both. And when her husband loses, she chips into the debate herself because she's
Indeed.
equally qualified to do so. So that's
So
the reverence for women is very much there.
very much there, and we had it, but sometime around the turn of the century, in some aspects and legitimized by certain texts in certain sections, perhaps the subjugation of women and to see them as an appendage of men, whether as a daughter or a wife or a mother, gained momentum. And today, unfortunately, elements of the ultra Hindu right are trying to enforce a patriarchal form of societal structuring on women, in dictating to them what they should wear, who they should meet, how they should behave, what they should eat, etc., which I believe goes against the very spirit with which Hindu civilization essentially accorded a status of great respect to women. Even the caste system, Shashi, the latest DNA research shows that for 2 millennia at least, if not more, caste was largely a matter of personal vocation without the limitations put on it by virtue of your birth. And there was complete interchange and exchange between different caste members. But again, sometime towards the end of the millennium and the second century CE, you found caste congeal, crystallize into this kind of inflexible hierarchy, which led to a great deal of. So, therefore, and I quote in my book how people like Savarkar, for instance, who are now lauded by the ultra right for their clarion call for what they interpret to mean a Hindu Rashtra, and I contextualize that also, and I consider it an extremely impractical idea given the imperatives of the modern republic. But nevertheless, unfortunately, people forget that Savarkar was an atheist who ridiculed cow worship and who made out a very strong case for social reform within Hinduism, as indeed did as Mahatma Gandhi, as Jyotibai Phule, as Swami Vivekanand, and a whole set of our pantheon of leaders who have the best interests of Hinduism at heart. So that is why I say what we need today is not Hindutva, but Hindu Satya.
Satya. I like that very much. That's a
And
great
that
line.
is what we need, the truth about Hinduism. And we should have the courage and the strength and the innovation and the resourcefulness to be able to take Hinduism to the next step, which will promise greater equality and certainly a greater sense of accepted inclusiveness.
Okay, well, look, let me take it from there into politics briefly, because one of the things you rightly have addressed throughout the book is that we have found ourselves in a peculiar position where seeing any merit in the great achievements of Hindu civilization is seen as enabling the bigotry and narrow mindedness that is today associated with the Hindutva cause. And what's interesting about this dilemma is that it is entirely possible, as you prove and I've proven through our writings and our speeches, to be proud of those accomplishments, the real ones, to ridicule the vast exaggerations like the Pushpak Vimans and these sort of
Dinanath Bhatta.
Batra's Vedic cars and so on, and we can, and or for that matter, the television GPS used by Sanjaya to narrate the battle to Dhritarashtra. All of that we can ridicule. We can take pride in the fact that, in fact, we did have the world's oldest recorded plastic surgery in our civilization, namely Shushruta's, his rhinoplasty, for which the surgical procedures and the tools have been excavated. So we've got actually a very proud history, but you completely destroy the credibility of that claim when you instead say that we have invented plastic surgery because Ganeshji's head was an elephant's head grafted on a human body. But anyone with 2 seconds of thought will realize that the smallest imaginable elephant head cannot fit the largest imaginable human body, let alone that of a young boy. So this kind of preposterous thinking actually discredits the real accomplishments. Mathematics, science, astronomy, all of those. Indian civilization produced the world beaters in those fields. And today we've cast ridicule about that. And as you say, others of a more liberal disposition have also tended, through the internalization of the colonial point of view, to reject their own civilization's accomplishments in order to mimic, as it were, the accomplishments of Western civilization. We need a corrective, no doubt about it. But the challenge for people like you and me is that today, speaking about Hindu civilization in the Indian political space, celebrating Hindu thought or Hindu religion is immediately conflated with the bigotry, the intolerance, the Dalit oppression, the casteism, the anti-Muslim violence, and the kind of chip on the shoulder attitude to Indian history, as well as the encouragement and expression of hatred, all of which obviously discredit the ideology that today rules the roost in our country, and thereby also discredit, unfortunately, the very valid points you make about Hindu civilization. How do we actually overcome that challenge?
You see, Shashi, one of the reasons why this would be a crackling discussion and may not be is because we tend to agree on many things, as you rightly said. However, this is a very important issue I raise in my book. In fact, my first chapter is called Hindu Civilization Myth or Reality. And there I take into account this strange propensity by a lot of people, which may be well intentioned, where they believe that by giving recognition to some of the legitimate and objectively verifiable remarkable achievements of Hindu civilization, we are somewhere contributing to Hindu glorification, which will feed into the bigotry and narrowness of the ultra right. Now, I
That's
posit to you that these are two separate issues. We will democratically and by the assertion of what we believe are the right interpretations of Hinduism and its civilization, counter those who are seeking to hijack or distort Hinduism. On the other hand, as a result of this fear, as I said, which could be well intentioned, there is a secular lobby, quote unquote secular, which believes that it's okay to devalue, demean, and denigrate much of Hindu civilization merely in order to prevent it from becoming akin to Hindu glorification. Now, this is a flawed logic, in my view. I have taken up the issues raised by this, for a lack of a better word, lobby. They have raised the question that there is no such word as Hindu. How can there be a civilization? I counter it by facts and reasoning. They say if there is a word called Hindu, then how there is no such thing as a Hindu civilization. Beyond medieval India, we only have the crossroads of history, one empire after another, and nothing so tangible or identifiable as a civilization. I counter that. Then they say, okay, if we accept there's a civilization, why should we call it only Hindu? It can be called Buddhist as well, as Amartya Sen argues. For a millennium in India was Buddhist. I again are countered by, among other things, saying that Buddhism was an offshoot of Hinduism. And there was never a relationship of that unsurpassable acrimony between the two of them. They were complementary faiths, and Buddhism is a great religion, but essentially the template of the land was Hinduism, from which Buddhism and Jainism both emanated, and that is why there is such an overlap between the three religions. Then they say that, all right, if that is the case, can we dare to say use Hinduism as a singular entity? It's so many things to so many people, according to them, that, as Wendy Doniger says, Hinduism, dare I say it with a capital H, it's a cross between a hedgehog and a tortoise, and so on and so forth. And I counter that because the diversity that Hinduism nurtures, indeed sanctions and allows, is its visiting card. And to say that because of that it lacks a central unifying thread is to miss the wood for the trees. And indeed, I have to counter that. Then there is a group of leftist historians. I don't mean to say this in any pejorative way, who
no,
want
no.
to see and interpret history only through the matrix of the class system. Was this period of history feudal, or was it serfdom, or what were the economic modes of production? And they refuse to take cognizance of the fact that while the economic aspects are important, there was also a civilizational basis to it. Then there are people who say, we will accept the colonial theory of all things of the antiquity of this civilization, but will not give it a greater antiquity lest it feed into Hindu glorification. I counter them by the latest research, the scientific data, including about the river Saraswati, and so on and so forth. So I take on board this, and you're very right. There seems to be, therefore, there are two aspects of this, Shashi. One is the motivated attempt by some people to downplay Hindu civilization. The other thing that worries me is the lack of curiosity among Hindus generally, even the indifference to know a little more about their civilization, to explore, to read, to discover this vast treasure house which is at their calling. Whether it's the audacity of thought and spirituality and metaphysics, whether it is this remarkable notion in the social structure of things of the four purusharths, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, the ultimate formula for a balanced life, whether it is the four ashrams, and the philosophy that they encompass, whether it's this remarkable theory of aesthetics, which Bharat in the Natya Shastra 600 years before the birth of Christ wrote, which is not a compendium of the arts but a meditation on what consists of the artistic experience. The whole notion of aesthetics, it's the most one of the in the field of art, one of the most remarkable contributions of India, whether it's about the achievements in political science. Kautilya says that before he wrote the Arthashastra, there were at least 6 schools of political philosophy from which he benefited. So there a great deal of thought was given to it. About the achievements in science, I mean,
Actually, your discussion of music is something you shouldn't downplay. It was remarkable.
yeah,
Very interesting. That's a civilizational contribution that is
music,
insufficiently
dance,
appreciated.
the arts and crafts included the sculpture,
Painting, yeah, absolutely.
poetry, grammatics. I mean, so what I'm trying to say is that this treasure house is there, but somehow we insulate ourselves from it. And I think, I don't know whether you agree with me, you've also written a lot on this. I think it's because Hinduism is more a way of life. No one pope, no one text, only no one Rome, no one mandatory ritual, and so on and so forth. That people lead it at a certain, practice it at a certain level, and take much of their civilization for granted. But I have tried to say in my book that there is a treasure house. You must try and read about it to understand it, not to nurture chauvinism or xenophobia, but I think it makes us better and more confident Indians.
Quite right. Um, Pavan, you will probably be attacked a little bit from the left. Uh, you've addressed already the possible attack that you have enabled, as it were, some of the worst elements in our polity, and I think you've given a robust answer to that. How do you react to the charge that you have perhaps downplayed some of the iniquities in the faith, particularly caste? Caste is the issue. Like me, you dismiss it as being not intrinsic to the fundamental philosophical verities that you are discussing. But since so many of our critics would say we have experienced Hinduism, as say Ambedkar did, through the lens of caste, how can you afford not to see that as a principal attribute of the faith whose civilizational contributions you are praising? How would you address that?
But Shashi, I disagree with you vehemently.
Huh.
I have spoken about the blemishes, serious blemishes,
Rather
foundation
briefly.
blemishes.
Rather briefly.
No, because it's not the length, but the degree of emphasis an author puts. And I've said that the caste system and gender disparity are two disfiguring aspects of this civilization, among there possibly others, but in particular. And I have dwelt on them in as much with as much emphasis as is possible. But I strongly believe that to throw the baby out with the bathwater only on account of these very, very justified failings of this, I mean, not justified, very well documented and accepted failings of our civilization, does not mean that we devalue the civilizational in its entirety. Tell me, Shashi, which civilization has been blemishless? So I accept them, I take them on board, I discuss them, and in fact, I end the book by talking at length about the need for social reform within Hinduism, which is precisely because of these blemishes. My Hindu Satya is about social reform within Hinduism, initiated by Hindus themselves in their own self interest as a part of an ongoing tradition by which Hinduism has for millennia reinvented itself and survived the challenges to its continuity and survival.
Excellent. So that brings us full circle to the discussion and asks the question, how do we go about this reform? Because you can't just, stick a thesis to a church door as Martin Luther did, nor can you simply challenge a Hindu pope in a debate and defeat him. How do you move the process of bringing Hindu reform to the forefront. And I would say this particularly in northern India, because I would say there are some reformist elements that have made greater headway in the south, certainly speaking of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, already than they have done where you are. But where there are deeply internalized values कि संतुलन ऐसा है, सामाजिक व्यवस्था को बदल नहीं सकते, आप तो इसको accept करना चाहिए. How do you proceed with bringing about meaningful change? Your book is a contribution to it, I believe, and discussing it. But we're discussing it in the language in which it is written, which is English, in a vocabulary that will not reach the vast majority of Hindus. How do we do that?
You know, I believe that there has to be a change in the mindset of Hindus. And I am one of those who believe that it may take time or it may be slower than it should, but this change in mindset is coming about gradually. It may not be coming out volitionally, but it is coming about. There are issues that contribute to it. Two, in particular, I want to highlight how to actualize this need for change. One is political empowerment. And this is where civilizations change, because you ultimately empower those who have been discriminated against, oppressed, and exploited. And it is happening perhaps much too incrementally, but happening substantially in our society. And people will assert their rights within the capacious and generous folds of Hinduism itself, reform it from within. The second great antidote is, and that's the passionate argument I make in my book, knowledge about Hinduism. A religion which says, Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham, which says that this all-pervasive cosmic Brahm is without category, adrisht, avyakt, nirvishesh chinmatram, undifferentiated consciousness. How can it admit man-made social hierarchies of this level of discrimination? Adi Shankaracharya himself had an interaction with, quote unquote, a Chandal, where he said that Chandalastu sa tu dvijastu gurureshya manish. For me, you are like the equivalent of my guru, whatever be your man-made position in the hierarchy. This is at the philosophical level, the spiritual level, our religion. Yes, there have been distortions, but ultimately, when people know about their own past, I think that is an antidote. Political empowerment is an antidote. Its changes in the educational curriculum is an antidote. So I have not given a full recipe for what needs to be done, but these are alluded to in my book. And I'm sure Hindus themselves, given their civilizational track record, will find the ways to once again innovate and make Hinduism continue to be one of the great living religions and civilization of the world.
Well said. And I think I'll wrap up at this point by saying that the Hindu Civilization by Pavan Varma is a book that gives you a great deal of insight into the civilizational achievements of Hindu thought, Hindu action, Hindu philosophy, and Hindu aesthetics, all of which he has summarized extremely effectively. He has also made an urgent and compelling case for a reclaiming of Hinduism from the narrow-minded bigots who currently have a monopoly over its expression and articulation. I have said in different contexts that they have taken a majestic civilization and reduced it to the team identity of the British football hooligan. And unfortunately, those of us who hail the majesty of the civilization tend to be accused every time we do so of enabling the narrow-minded bigotry. And I think Pavan's book offers a robust response to that charge, in particular because his book itself is a contribution to the effort to reclaim the faith and the civilizational constructs of the faith for a more liberal, more expansive, more inclusive, and more accepting view of what Hindu civilization permits under its very capacious rubric. With those words, I hand you back to the organizers for a formal launch of the book today. The floor is yours, Kartika, if you're still there.
You're
There we are.
muted, Kartika. You're muted.
Sorry. I was going to say, do you want to take a question or two, or should we wrap up
No, no,
because
I
it's
don't want
past
to
time?
take, because I know I don't say it for myself. I say it for Shashi, who's
Okay.
had a long day, and we've had a fulfilling discussion. So we'll
Yes.
leave it for round two sometime.
Yeah, I mean, I
Fine.
did see the questions on the chat. I honestly thought that they would take us in a different direction from where our conversation's gone. So let's
Okay.
leave this now for this point, apart from the fact that we're all running an hour and a half later than
Yeah,
we should
yeah,
be.
sure.
And thank
So
you
I'll
so much
just
for
say
this
thank you
opportunity.
very much. No, Shashi, thank you very much.
And
Thank you,
formally
Pavan.
release,
Let's
formally
hold
launch
up
the
the
book.
book. Here's the book. And one shot
Formally launch
someone's
the book.
taking, I'm sure. Yeah.
There we
Thank
go.
you again.
Actually,
And it was a firecracker of a conversation, no
Thank
less.
you.
So
Thank you, Kartika.
have a
but keep
good
holding it
evening.
up so
And
I can get a picture to tweet, Pavan. Keep holding it up.
hold
Okay,
up the
one
book.
second.
Whoops. What have I got here?
You
1
froze
second.
a bit.
Yeah, my problem is that I also need to hold the book up and hold the camera up, but I've got help now with the there we are.
We'll send you a picture.
Excellent.
That might be
There
simpler.
we are. There we are. Of all three of us, great. Well, it's also an apology to all those on Twitter whom I incited to join us at 7 and then kept them waiting till 10 past 8. Thank you all very much. The book is launched and I wish you
Thank
great
you.
success, which it richly deserves. I'm sure we'll have more occasions to talk about it, Pavan. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Shashi. See you soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Kartika.
Thanks.
Thanks, Pavan. Bye.
Bye.